A heavy fog rolls across San Francisco Bay on a March morning in 1934. Through the mist, a rocky island emerges, crowned with concrete and steel. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary opens its doors today, and America believes it has built the perfect prison. What the government will spend the next 3 decades hiding is that perfection came at a price measured in broken minds, censored deaths, and experiments that violated every principle the institution claimed to uphold. These are the 20 facts they tried to bury. The cell blocks smell like salt water mixed with industrial disinfectant. Every surface is cold. Steel bars, concrete floors, metal bed frames bolted to stone walls. But it is not the architecture that makes Alcatraz different from every other prison in America. It is the silence. Pause. The rule of silence is absolute. Prisoners cannot speak during meals. They cannot speak in their cells. They cannot speak in the corridors or the yard or the workshops. A man can spend years here and never hear his own voice except in his head, where it starts to sound like someone else. Guards enforce this with clubs and isolation cells. One prisoner writes in a smuggled letter that the silence is worse than the beatings, because at least pain confirms you still exist. The human brain is not designed for this. After 6 months, men start talking to the walls. After a year, the walls talk back. Here is what nobody tells you about the cells. They measure 5 feet by 9 feet. A grown man can touch both walls with his arms extended. The bed is a thin mattress on a metal frame. There is a sink. There is a toilet with no seat. There is a small shelf. That is everything. Now imagine spending 23 hours a day in this space. The remaining hour is for showering and exercise in a yard, where talking is still forbidden. Some men spend years without touching another human being, except during mandatory searches. The cells have no privacy. Guards walk past every 30 minutes, day and night, shining flashlights through the bars. Sleep becomes impossible. The mind begins to fracture from sensory deprivation. Psychiatrists who later study Alcatraz inmates discover that prolonged isolation causes permanent brain damage. The frontal lobe starts to atrophy. Memory formation breaks down. Some men forget their own names. The water surrounding Alcatraz stays at 50 degrees year-round, cold enough to kill in 15 minutes. But that is not why escape is impossible. The currents are the real killer. The bay produces riptides that move at 6 miles per hour, fast enough to drag an Olympic swimmer out to sea. The government knows this. Every guard knows this. The prisoners know this. And yet, men still try. 36 prisoners attempt escape during Alcatraz's 29 years of operation. 23 are caught. 6 are shot and killed. 2 drown. 5 disappear and are presumed dead. That is the official record. Pause. But there is a problem with the official record. Several guards, years after retiring, admit that more men tried than the files acknowledge. Some attempts were erased because they revealed security failures. Some prisoners who vanished were written up as deaths from natural causes. The real number of escape attempts may be twice what the government admits. Every meal at Alcatraz is served in silence. The dining hall holds 300 men at steel tables. Forks scrape against metal trays. Boots shuffle on concrete, but no voices. Guards patrol the catwalks above with rifles. One wrong word, one whispered joke, and a prisoner loses yard privileges for a month. But here is the bizarre part. Softly, the food is actually good. Better than most prisons. Fresh vegetables, real meat. Seconds are allowed. The government discovered something cynical during the Great Depression. Hungry men riot. Well-fed men comply. So Alcatraz feeds its prisoners restaurant-quality meals 3 times a day, while simultaneously crushing their minds with isolation. It is a calculated trade. Your body stays healthy while your sanity dissolves. Former prisoners describe this as the cruelest trick of all. The institution kept them alive and physically strong so they could fully experience the psychological torture. Strip searches happen every day, multiple times, after meals, after yard time, after work detail, after visits, after nothing, just because a guard decides. Prisoners stand naked in cold rooms, while guards examine every inch of their bodies. Mouths opened, hair searched, cavities inspected. This is not about finding contraband, everyone knows this. It is about reminding a man he owns nothing, not even his own skin. One prisoner writes that after 3 years of daily searches, he stops feeling like a person. He becomes an object that the institution moves and examines and stores. The psychological term for this is learned helplessness. The mind stops resisting because resistance has no meaning. Several prisoners develop a condition where they cannot make decisions anymore. When released, they stand frozen in grocery stores, unable to choose between two brands of bread. Their brains have forgotten how to want things. The library at Alcatraz contains 15,000 books. Prisoners can check out titles and read in their cells. This sounds humane until you learn the rules. Books about escape are banned. Books about boats are banned. Books about San Francisco are banned. Books with maps are banned. Books with certain words highlighted or underlined are banned. Eventually, almost everything is banned except westerns and romance novels, but even those get censored. Guards black out passages with ink. Sometimes entire chapters disappear. One prisoner requests a book about birds. It arrives with every mention of flight removed. Another asks for a dictionary. It comes with pages torn out. The library is not about education. It is about demonstrating that even imagination has limits inside these walls. Letters are the only connection to the outside world. Prisoners can write 1 letter per week, 3 pages maximum. Guards read every word. Anything critical of the prison is deleted. Anything that mentions conditions is deleted. Anything that sounds too sad is deleted. What arrives to families is a hollow shell of communication. I am fine. The weather is cold. I hope you are well. Over and over, year after year, the same empty sentences because any real thought gets censored. Families stop writing back. They think their son or husband or brother has become emotionless. They do not know he has been writing his heart out, and it has been cut away before it reaches them. Some prisoners stop writing entirely. Why confess love to a censor? The psychological damage of this is profound. Men lose the ability to express emotion. When they are finally released, they cannot tell their families they missed them. The words have been edited out of their souls. Visiting hours happen once per month, 30 minutes. Families travel from across the country for half an hour behind glass. There is no physical contact. Conversations happen through telephones. Guards listen to every word. Topics are restricted. Prisoners cannot discuss their cases. They cannot discuss other inmates. They cannot discuss guards. They cannot discuss daily life. What is left? Weather, health, vague pleasantries. Children grow up visiting their fathers and never actually knowing them. Wives sit across glass dividers from husbands they have not touched in years. The cruelty is in the proximity. Your loved one is right there. You can see them breathe, you can watch their eyes, but you cannot hold their hand. Several prisoners refuse visits entirely. They say it is easier to forget they have families than to maintain this ghost of connection. One man tells his wife to stop coming. "You are mourning someone who is still alive," he writes. "Let me be dead to you." It hurts less. Work assignments are mandatory. Prisoners labor in the laundry, the furniture factory, the clothing shop, 8 hours a day, in silence. The work is monotonous. Folding the same sheet, sanding the same chair leg over and over for years. The government pays prisoners between 5 and 25 cents per day. This is not about rehabilitation or job training. This is about keeping minds occupied so they do not shatter completely. But it does not work. The repetitive labor combined with absolute silence creates a trance state. Men move like automatons. Their eyes glaze. Some prisoners describe feeling like they are watching themselves from outside their bodies. Psychologists have a term for this: depersonalization. The mind detaches from the body as a defense mechanism. Several prisoners develop catatonia. They stop moving, stop eating, stop responding to commands. The institution classifies this as malingering and punishes them with isolation. But it is not manipulation. It is a complete psychological break. The mind has given up. Showers happen twice per week. Prisoners are escorted in groups to the shower room. Water temperature is controlled by guards. Sometimes it is freezing. Sometimes it scalds. There is no explanation for the variation. Prisoners suspect it is deliberate. A reminder that the institution controls even basic comfort. Showers last exactly 4 minutes. Soap is provided. Towels are thin. Prisoners dry off and return to cells where damp cold settles into their bones. There is no heating in the cell blocks. San Francisco fog creeps through the barred windows. Men sleep under thin blankets in 50-degree air. Pneumonia is common. Arthritis develops early. Some prisoners wrap themselves in newspapers for insulation. Others hudge close to water pipes that carry slightly warm water. The cold is another layer of control. A body focused on not freezing is a body too exhausted to resist. The hole. That is what prisoners call D-block solitary confinement. A cell within a cell. Complete darkness. No windows, no light. Soundproofed walls. A man disappears into the hole and the world disappears with him. Guards slide food through a slot twice a day. There is no toilet. A bucket is provided. The smell becomes unbearable within hours. Pause. Some men spend weeks in the hole. Some spend months. The record is 19 days. After 3 days in complete darkness and silence, the mind begins to hallucinate. Prisoners report seeing colors that do not exist, hearing music that is not playing, feeling insects crawling on skin that is not there. The brain invents stimulus because stimulus is required for sanity, but the hallucinations are not comforting. They are terrifying. Shapes move in the darkness, voices whisper threats. Some men emerge from the hole unable to speak, others emerge violent. Others never fully emerge at all. Their bodies leave, but their minds stay trapped in that black room forever. Here is what the files do not mention. The hole was used for experiments. During the 1950s, when the CIA begins its MK-Ultra program, Alcatraz becomes a testing ground. Prisoners in solitary are given drugs without their knowledge. LSD, mescaline. Experimental compounds with no names. The goal is to study sensory deprivation combined with chemical interrogation. Can a mind be broken completely? Can personality be erased? Can new behaviors be programmed? The answer, it turns out, is yes. Several prisoners lose the ability to remember who they were before Alcatraz. Their identities dissolve. The government classifies these experiments. The files are sealed. When they are finally released decades later under Freedom of Information requests, huge sections are redacted. But enough remains to understand what happened. Human beings were used as test subjects for psychological warfare research, without consent, without medical oversight, without any accountability. Suicide attempts are frequent. Hanging is the most common method. Bed sheets twisted into nooses. But the cells are designed to prevent this. There are no anchor points, no hooks, no pipes high enough, so men get creative. Some try to drown themselves in sinks. Others swallow metal objects hoping for internal injuries. A few attempt to bleed out by reopening old wounds over and over. The institution logs these as accidents. A man slipped in the shower. A man choked on food. A man fell downstairs. The death certificates rarely say suicide because suicide statistics reflect poorly on prison conditions. Families receive bodies and vague explanations. Years later, when records are unsealed, the truth emerges. The suicide rate at Alcatraz is 3 times higher than official numbers. Some men who died from natural causes show signs of self-inflicted trauma. Others have injuries inconsistent with the official story. The government buried the evidence because it revealed what Alcatraz actually was. Not a prison, a machine for destroying human minds. Violence between prisoners is rare. This surprises people. With hardened criminals packed together, you would expect constant fights. But violence requires energy, and Alcatraz drains all energy through isolation and silence. Men are too psychologically broken to organize conflicts. The real violence comes from guards. Beatings for minor infractions, for talking, for looking at a guard wrong, for walking too slowly, for moving too quickly. Prisoners who fight back are beaten worse. Those who do not fight back are beaten anyway. The savagery is systematic. Guards know they can act with impunity because who will believe a convicted criminal? One prisoner named Roof Pursfall is beaten so severely he loses an eye. The official report says he slipped. Another prisoner named Ed Wootka is found dead in his cell with bruises covering his torso. The official report says natural causes. Pause. Former guards, interviewed decades later, admit the truth. Brutality was policy, not aberration. New guards were told explicitly, "These are animals, treat them accordingly." The ones who refused were reassigned. The ones who embraced it were promoted. Medical care is minimal. A prison doctor visits once a week. Serious illnesses are ignored. Broken bones are splinted but not set properly. Dental problems are solved with extraction, not treatment. Prisoners with chronic pain are given aspirin, that is all. Men suffer from untreated conditions for years, hernias, infections, tumors. The philosophy is simple. These men are already serving life sentences. Why waste resources keeping them comfortable? Several prisoners die from preventable diseases. One man dies from appendicitis because the doctor assumes he is faking for attention. Another dies from an infected wound that was never cleaned. The death certificates list natural causes. Families never learn that neglect killed their sons. The medical files from Alcatraz reveal something darker. Some prisoners were deliberately denied treatment as punishment. A man who complained about conditions might find his medication withheld. Another who filed a grievance might be told the doctor is unavailable for months. This is torture by omission. Let the body punish what the guards cannot touch. The workshops are the most dangerous places in Alcatraz. Furniture factories have saws and lathes. The laundry has industrial presses and boiling water. These are tools that could be weapons. So security is extreme. But accidents still happen. A prisoner loses fingers to a table saw. Another is scalded by steam. A third is crushed when a press malfunctions. The institution classifies these as industrial accidents, but survivors tell a different story. Some accidents were arranged by guards. A prisoner causing problems might be assigned to a dangerous machine with faulty safety equipment, or he might be placed near another prisoner with a grudge. The institution looks the other way. When the inevitable happens, it is tragic but convenient. One less problem to manage. Several families sue for wrongful death. The cases are dismissed. The government argues that prisoners assumed risk by working. What the government does not mention is that work is mandatory. Refusing an assignment means the whole. So prisoners choose between potential death and certain torture. Visits from journalists are forbidden. Alcatraz operates in total secrecy. The American public knows the island exists, but not what happens inside. The government releases photographs of clean cells and orderly mealtimes. They show the library. They mention the good food. They describe Alcatraz as strict but fair. The reality is so far from this narrative that it exists in another dimension. When the prison finally closes in 1963, journalists are allowed inside for the first time. What they document shocks the nation. Cells caked in mold, solitary confinement units that violate basic human rights, evidence of systematic abuse. But by then, the worst has been cleaned up. The D-block cells have been repainted. The most damaged prisoners have been transferred. The tour is carefully managed. Even so, the reports are damning enough that the government never opens another supermax prison under the same model. Alcatraz becomes an embarrassment, a symbol of how far America strayed from its own ideals. Robert Stroud is the most famous prisoner at Alcatraz, the Birdman. Except he never kept birds at Alcatraz. That was Leavenworth. At Alcatraz, he is a man in a cell like any other. But the myth persists because the truth is too bleak. Stroud is violently insane. He murders a guard in Leavenworth and is sentenced to death. His mother's campaign gets the sentence commuted to life. At Alcatraz, he spends 42 years in isolation. 42 years. Most of it in solitary. He reads books. He writes papers on bird diseases. But he is not the sympathetic figure from the movie. He is a deeply unstable man, kept alive in a concrete box because the government no longer executes prisoners. His mind disintegrates slowly. Guards report that he talks to himself constantly, full conversations with people who are not there. When he is finally transferred to a medical facility in 1959, he can barely function. He dies 4 years later. The public remembers the Birdman. The institution remembers a cautionary tale about what happens when you bury a human being alive. Al Capone arrives at Alcatraz in 1934 as the most famous criminal in America. He expects privilege. What he receives is anonymity. At Alcatraz, there are no celebrity prisoners. Capone is just a number, AZ-85. He is assigned to the clothing shop. He mops floors and folds laundry. Guards treat him no differently than anyone else. In fact, they treat him worse because breaking a famous man proves the system works. Capone's health declines rapidly. He has syphilis untreated for years and it attacks his brain. He begins showing signs of dementia, confusion, memory loss, paranoia. The prison doctor does little. By 1938, Capone is essentially non-functional. He is transferred to Terminal Island and then released in 1939. He dies in 1947, his mind completely destroyed. The official line is that syphilis killed him, but former inmates suggest the decline was accelerated by conditions at Alcatraz, the isolation, the silence, the psychological stress. A healthy mind might have resisted the disease longer. Capone's mind was already crumbling. Alcatraz finished the job. The escape of 1962 is Alcatraz's greatest mystery. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers dig through the concrete around their cell vents with stolen spoons. They hide the holes with fake grills made from cardboard. They create dummy heads from soap and hair to fool guards during night counts. On June 11th, they crawl through the vents, climb to the roof, and vanish into the bay on a raft made from raincoats. They are never seen again. Pause. The official position is that they drowned. The currents, the cold water. No bodies are ever found, but that proves nothing in the bay. Except, a car is stolen in Marin County the next day. A blue Chevy. The thief is never caught. A family in South America reports seeing men matching the Anglin's description years later. A photograph surfaces in 2015 showing two men who might be the brothers in Brazil. The FBI closes the case in 1979, declaring the men dead, but the US Marshals keep it open. They still investigate tips. The truth is that nobody knows. Maybe they drowned. Maybe they made it. The government prefers the first story because the second is unacceptable. Nobody escapes Alcatraz. That is the rule. To admit otherwise is to admit the entire system was fallible. When Alcatraz closes in 1963, the official reason is cost. The island is expensive to maintain. Salt water corrodes everything. Shipping supplies is difficult, but cost is not the real reason. The real reason is that the public is starting to ask questions. Rumors leak about conditions. Former prisoners tell stories. Families file lawsuits. The Justice Department realizes that Alcatraz has become a liability. It represents an era of punishment that America is trying to move beyond. So they close it quietly. The last prisoners are transferred. The guards are reassigned. The island sits empty for 6 years. Then, in 1969, Native American activists occupy the island, claiming it under an old treaty. They stay for 19 months. During that time, they discover things left behind: files, records, equipment. Some of it suggests that not everything about Alcatraz was documented. There are rooms with restraint equipment that never appeared in official reports. There are medical supplies consistent with experimental procedures. There are logs with entries that have been blacked out. The activists try to bring this to public attention. The government dismisses it as anti-establishment propaganda. When the occupation ends, the evidence disappears. Today, Alcatraz is a tourist attraction. Visitors walk through sanitized cell blocks and listen to audio tours narrated by former guards. It is sold as history, but the real history is in sealed files and buried testimonies and the minds of men who never recovered. Here is the final fact, the one they truly tried to erase. Between 1951 and 1962, at least 11 prisoners died under circumstances that were never properly investigated. The official causes range from heart failure to accidents to suicides. But medical examiners who later review the autopsy reports find inconsistencies, injuries that do not match the stated cause, toxicology results that suggest poisoning, timelines that do not align with guard logs. What happened to these men? Pause. Some theories suggest they were victims of unchecked guard violence. Others propose they were subjects in experiments that went wrong. A few researchers believe they witnessed something they should not have and were silenced. The truth is buried in redacted files and lost documents. Families were told their loved ones died of natural causes. They grieved and moved on. But natural causes do not explain fractured skulls. They do not explain chemical burns. They do not explain bodies found in locked cells with no access to the materials that caused their deaths. Alcatraz kept many secrets. This is the one that still haunts the survivors. Somewhere in those cold cells, men died for reasons the government will never acknowledge. The island sits in the bay today, a monument and a warning. Tourists photograph the cell blocks where men went insane. They stand in the cafeteria, where silence was law. They peer into the hole and shudder, unable to imagine spending even an hour in that darkness. The audio tour mentions the famous prisoners. It talks about the escape attempts. It describes the strict rules. What it does not mention is the systematic destruction of human minds. It does not mention the experiments or the censored deaths or the guards who beat men until they stopped being men. Alcatraz was closed because it could not be defended anymore. Not because rehabilitation won over punishment, but because the punishment became too visible. The cracks were showing. Better to close the prison than to answer the questions. So the government locked the doors and turned it into a museum. They control the narrative now. They decide what visitors see and hear, but the walls remember, and so do the men who survived. They carry Alcatraz with them, a prison inside their minds that never closed. that operates still in the darkness where memory lives. That is the legacy, not the myth of the inescapable fortress, but the reality of what humans do to each other when nobody is watching.